All right, so welcome everyone to this Astro Duet. Today we have Victor Oliver, who is the editor of the journal, the Astrological Journal, and also of Stellar, and Mary English, who is one of the members of the board of the Astrological Association. And they're going to be chatting, discussing about Sun Sign Astrology, which is one of the I don't know, one of the discussions that sometimes we have is they are worth in it or not? Should we use it or not? Does it make astrology look good? Does it make astrology look bad? And all of these ideas. Before we begin, just to remind you that this event is a donation-based event. So if you want to support us, I'm putting the link in the chat box. Remember that the AA is a charity. All of the people who are members of the board who are working as volunteers. So any help you can give us will help us to do more events, to prepare more conference and more stuff. We make a suggestion if you want. If you go to the webpage, you're going to see there are suggestions of 5, 10, 20 pounds. You decide what you do, what you can. If you cannot make any donation, you are still welcome. And we ask you to promote this event, okay? And this is how you can still help us and support us. All right, so I think that's all of the things I have to say. And I don't know who would like to start, Victor or Mary. Do you want to start? Do you want me to ask a question? How do you want to do?
Um, Toss a coin. I'm very happy for Mary to start. After all, she is on the board,
Okay.
whereas I'm just
Thank
a
you.
hire. I'm just a hire.
Oh, yes, so I am a sun sign astrologer. I've written 12 books, one for each sign of the zodiac, and the first one was How to Survive a Pisces, which is my sign of the zodiac. And I've discovered 3 years later, after doing a series of 12 books for the publisher, that the guy that took the contract with me actually is a sun sign Pisces. So that was quite fun. So I did 12 books for him, and they're sun sign books. So they're talking about that particular sign of the zodiac. But in it, I squished in about the moon signs and also how to go to astro.com and create your chart. And I haven't come across people that are discriminatory of sun sign astrologers. It wasn't until, I don't know, I was in the field for about 30 years, then I started talking to people, oh, just a sun sign astrologer. So, oh, there's quite a lot involved, and it's not just talking about the sun signs, there's other bits as well. But yeah, I don't have a problem either way. I'm happy being a sun sign astrologer, but I also do people's charts. So I'm using both parts of it. But I perfectly understand why people only do sun sign astrology, because they're dealing with the masses. So lots of people will follow a sun sign astrologer that's just talking about their sign of the zodiac because it's easier, much easier than going into your ascendant being this and your moon being that. And there's 12 signs of the zodiac. And if you're writing a column, which I did do for a long time, if you had to do all the combos, you'd be there forever. It takes ages just to write even 12 signs. So, yeah, I think if anybody gives sun sign astrologers a hard time, they're going to have a word with me first.
The saint of sunshine. The how do you say the I don't know what I want to say. I'll shut up. Go, Victor. Yes.
Well, I'm going to use the word snobbery. I'm not a Gemini for nothing, the Aquarius rising. When I first started, when I took over from Carol as Astrological Journal editor, the first thing I did is I put an elephant on the cover, as you do with an astrology magazine, and the skin was painted with sun signs, basically. And I ran a piece promoting sun sign astrology. So to some extent, Mary and I are coming from the same direction, but it comes out looking a bit different. And I remember being horribly attacked and the plots to get rid of me and all the rest of it. And this goes to the bottom point that Mary's touched on, is that there is within the astrological world some negative attitudes to sun sign astrology. And I think it's based on the idea that somehow it's so simplistic that it actually misrepresents what astrology is about. And to some extent, that may be the case, but anything that popularizes or is the interface with the public or the entertainment end of the market will tend to simplify. But I also remember Wade Caves. I'm sure we all know dear Wade. And years ago, he wrote a very good two-part essay for me about what draws people into astrology in the first place. And it was very interesting. And he spoke to very distinguished astrologers, some quite famous. And about half of them, half to 60%, cited a sun sign astrologer, whether it was Linda Goodman, whether it was Russell Grant, whether it was this, whether it was that. Patrick Walker, some of us are old enough to remember
Oh,
him.
I remember him. He used to
Yeah.
write for The Standard.
Horrible man. But he was immensely rich. He wrote for the London Evening Standard, for Harper's and Queen. He worked for a magazine that I worked for. In other words, he was syndicated all over the place. And but these people were cited as the starting point. And I think that we have to remember that when we're talking about sun sign astrology, we're actually talking about the same materials that we use. The question is, what do we do with that material? So the sun sign astrology is a simplification, but I want to say something more about Dennis Elwell, but I don't want to overtalk in the starting point. But just to say that I think there's an immense amount of subtlety to be found in the solar scope, which is a sun sign chart. I'll come back to that word solar scope because it's a grand word for sun sign charts, basically. And that would be my starting point in this conversation. There may be other perspectives in the audience, but that's where I'm at.
Yes, if anybody in the audience wants to share what you think, if you think it's valuable, do you think... So for now, I see that, Victor, what you're saying is that maybe it does simplify astrology, but it works as a gateway. And I think, Mary, you have a similar point of view, right?
Yeah, it is the gateway, because if people, like Victor's already said, your introduction to astrology will always only ever be that you know what sign of the zodiac you are.
Yes.
And then that's what then gets you further into things, yeah?
Yes. Julia, I think you want to add something.
Julia, best to...
Yes, I wanted to add that sun sign is for the public, i.e. the moon. If you think that the moon represents the public, sun sign astrology is for the moon. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, that works. There was a guy, I'm going to move on a bit, and I don't want to overtalk.
You can overtalk, yes, please. That's why we have to...
I'm sure Carol will remember, and others will remember, there was a very distinguished astrologer many years ago called Dennis Elwell, an English astrologer. He's passed away now. And there's no question he was very, very clever. I mean, he worked a lot for the Astrological Journal, and his essays are marvelous. Very, very readable guy. But he also became rather notorious for his vicious attacks on sun sign astrologers. He thought they were a bunch of con merchants and that they were banal and all the rest of it. But then, oddly enough, he wrote an essay about the solar scope, which again, coming back to the sun sign chart, because in the end, it's all about where the sun is in determining which planets on the so-called ascendant and all the rest of it. And he was going on about how the solar scope is so subtle, can be so subtle. It depends on the intention of the astrologer, what you aim to do. But then he would go into these horrible attacks on sun sign astrologers. But the thing that he didn't seem to understand was that you have to market what you do. There was a philosopher called Marshall McLuhan many years ago who came up with the saying, the medium is the message. In other words, to some extent, what you do is going to be shaped by the vehicle in which or through which you are communicating. So if you're writing, say, for the Daily Mail, obviously you're not going to be writing philosophical essays. And there will be an element of banality because you're dealing with very basic stuff and you're having to find general themes that will apply to each of the signs. And he didn't seem to understand that the medium itself has to be pleasured, to use an odd word. If you don't please the market, then the editor will find an alternative. Now, does that actually affect the quality of the astrology? Well, at some level it does. And there are some astrologers who can't write. It's as simple as that. And there are some who actually, how should we put this? They allow their personal obsessions to preoccupy. But I once did, just to finish my point, we've all heard of Mystic Meg, who knew much more about horses than astrology, I rather suspect. because she had her own stables and everything. And she wasn't really a trained astrologer. But oddly enough, if you examine carefully what she wrote, they were based on the transits and the eclipses and one thing and another, but very subtly wrapped up. Very subtly wrapped up. So to a professional astrologer, it looked like banal rubbish. And I fully accept that sometimes, of course, if you're writing a book, Mary, that's a different matter. You know, you can elaborate ideas, but in a column, you may only have 60 words. When I worked at the Lady magazine, it was 60 words, a star sign. So the compression and trying to remain entertaining, but also to have a little kernel. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, but I don't want to overtalk.
Yeah, but you do have to do it, because I used to write a column for the Green Parent magazine, which was like green and eco and all the rest of it. And I did their column, and it came out 4 times a year, the magazine. I think it's still going. And the lady editor wanted me to write a bigger chunk for the predominant sign for that issue. So I'd write slightly more words. But I can't remember how many words it was that I wrote in total, but it was basically one side of A4 in a magazine. And I got paid per word or per issue or something. But you literally, when you're writing a column, and you'll know this, it's a space. Space is money. You can't overwrite, which you can in a book because you can add an extra page in, but you can't in a magazine. So there definitely is a word count. But you also have to take into account, I mean, I know everybody, your chart's really, really important stuff, but sun signs are so important. The sign of the zodiac that you are, you're going to be reacting to life in the way that your zodiac sign is. Yes, I take your ascendant and your moon and your whatever, but we're not going to get into politics. But there's certain signs of the zodiac and stuff. You just go, well, you can't expect them to be any different because they are that sign of the zodiac. Do you know what I mean? I think that's quite useful. Just the division of 12 without all the other, which I do all the other things, don't get me wrong, otherwise I wouldn't be able to run a business. But for columns, there definitely is a word count, and you've got to get into it, those amounts of words, otherwise, you know.
Factory hen astrology, basically. You know, you've got to lay the eggs. And there are industrial processes to induce egg laying. When I was first taken on by Rachel Johnson, the sister of Boris Johnson, sometime Prime Minister, for 3 minutes. She was the editor of the Lady magazine, which was a sort of upmarket, aristocratic, and their slaves type magazine. You know, it's actually folded last year. But the point of this story is that she'd actually come across some of my satirical horoscopes in my blog, Madame Arcati. And she didn't actually understand that they weren't piss takes, if I can use that word, of astrology, but actually building a bit of humor into the subject. And she said, I want you to do what you do on your blog and take the P out of astrology. And I said, I'll be doing nothing of the sort, because your type of reader will be looking for some comfort, some truth, usually quite educated people, quite intelligent people. You've got to be giving them something in order to reward them to read you in the first place. If you're just taking the mickey, after a while they will lose. Not only do you lose as an astrologer, but you lose your audience, because even somebody who's looking at the Mystic Megs or the whoever they're reading in the paper, Russell Grant or whatever, will be looking for some comfort or something that's get them through the day. And some people like to deny that, and they say they're being conned. No, they're not, because most sun sign astrologers are professional astrologers. Jonathan Caner, for example, he was making £2 million a year from the Daily Mail. And he used to tear his heart out. I mean, he had slaves to write the stuff, but he would go over it to make sure that the house style was conformed to. So the professional writer astrologer will be very, very assiduous in getting across the truth of astrology while trying to also please the market. And also, in the end, I ended up developing my own style on the Lady magazine. Rachel gave up trying to train me, and she said, well, just do it. And as you say, Mary, fill the space, fill the page. You've got 850 words, and we're paying you the following fee.
But this is interesting, because perhaps sometimes we judge sun sign astrology, but we think we are thinking about sun sign astrology, but actually we're thinking more about the format and not so much about the technique.
Yes, I think that's true, actually. Of course, when you do a horary, or when you do a highly analytical progressions report, or whatever it is that you're doing, or a solar return, of course, there are immense subtleties that will be lost in a sun sign column. But I go back to my original point that we're using the same materials. And as natal astrologers, or whatever you are, whatever kind of specialism that you take on as a serious astrologer, you're still in the end looking at transits. And what is a solar scope in the end, but looking at the transits per sign? And that's why I call simplification, because obviously the process is not complicated, not really. I mean, I got to the stage, I don't know about you, Mary, but after about 10 years of doing it, I could do 850 words in 40 minutes. I'd look at the chart and suddenly get the story for each sign, just like that.
Yeah.
Edwina, you've got your hand up. Sorry, Edwina's got a hand up. Unmute yourself, darling.
You've got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I know. I just realised. Sorry, I've not been on Zoom for so long. You were making me think when you were talking about the papers and the newspapers and articles and stuff. Recently, I had a friend just around chatting, and I've known her an awfully long time, and she is quite simply one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. She runs 2 Pilates businesses. She's an expert in multiple things. She's taught rugby teams. She's taught like England rugby teams. She teaches professionals. And she was asking me about astrology, and I was just talking in general. I've done a lot of work with Alejo, so I've been taught by Alejo. But I was just generally talking what to me seemed, fairly basic. And after about 10 minutes, she went, you're going to have to stop. You're going to have to stop, because she said, you've made me realize when I'm talking to people about Pilates and all of these different things, I come in on far too high a level. And I presume everybody's up there, and they're not. And she says it made her realize that when she's teaching that she's going to have to lower, because your common person hasn't got the knowledge. And that's what I've noticed when I try and talk to people about astrology. Just go back to the sun and talk about the sun, because it blows their mind. It really blows their mind. And when you're talking to other people who've studied astrology and astrologers like me, talking to all of you, you're all experts. I know nothing. But my friends see me as somebody who knows what she's talking about. So it's coming back to just the sun sign. It's something that people can handle. Your average bog standard person who hasn't got a clue get it. They get that.
I think that's a wonderful point, Edwina. Going back to Patrick Walker, by the way, that's Patrick without a K. There was no special K in his name, but he was an amazing guy. And Nick Campion told me, he was very much part of Soho Society, Patrick Walker. He lived actually on Rhodes. And I interviewed him once, and he said, I draw horoscopes on the sand of Lindos. I didn't realize at the time that he probably was taking the mickey, but maybe he did. But the point of the matter is this: he could sit down with somebody in the basement of some nightclub, as Nick Campion did with him, and he might say, well, I'm this or that, which star sign, and he could give a fairly accurate analysis of where you are in your life, and one thing and another, which then brings in that idea that maybe astrology is not just about where Venus is or where Mars is, but some people are so immersed in the subject that they tap something else. And he did this over and over again as a party piece. He could just deliver information that people could receive and acknowledge the value of. And isn't that remarkable? And also, may I just say something else? I said earlier that many distinguished astrologers are also sun sign astrologers. Geoffrey Cornelius, who was a very academic style astrologer, who wrote a wonderful book, The Moment, I think it's called The Moment of Astrology, isn't it? I read it recently, a fabulous book, very much coming from the magical end of astrology. But he also wrote a sun sign column for young female teenagers under a pseudonym. And if it's good enough for Geoffrey Cornelius, it's good enough for me.
And Carol, and I think you wanted to say something also before.
Yes, I I'm finding this discussion really fascinating. Thank you for broaching this subject, because it's so obvious, and yet it's so seminal, I think, to what we do and how we think about ourselves as astrologers. And I wonder whether, I mean, taking up your point, Victor, about Jeffrey, and of course his partner Maggie was also a sun sign columnist, and there's many in our astrological community who write columns in all sorts of different circumstances. And absolutely taking your point, Mary, that there is a great art in distilling down the essence of symbolism into a very few words and putting that across in a way which is going to be attractive and inviting and has a meaning encased in it. And I think there's the idea of the person who is writing the column, and then there's the recipient. So it's a conversation, it's a relationship. And calling on Jeffrey's idea of the notion of astrology as a form of divination, if you read a sun sign column in that spirit, then it absolutely speaks at a very deep level, can potentially speak at a very deep level. It has very great meaning. And in my view, I mean, I have great respect for sun sign columnists, because actually what you get is sometimes the essence of something really distilled down, and it's absolutely beautiful to read. And I think there's a question here for astrologers. This is the shadow for astrologers, which is the idea of legitimacy or illegitimacy, and the idea of making a separation, which in a way we could say, I don't know, I mean, could you say it's a false distinction between an appropriate technique or an inappropriate technique, or a technique or a way of looking at astrology or practicing it which is legitimate and one that isn't? I think we're all afraid of not being legitimate because we don't, astrology is it's an uphill struggle to try and explain astrology to the outside world. And so there's a shadow side, in a sense, that we try to legitimize to the outside world what it is that we do and who it is that we are, by trying to distance, if you take birth chart work and you try to distance that from sun sign column work, and you try to make this distinction. It says, well, I do the proper stuff over here and these other people do this other stuff over there. And I think it's a false distinction. I think there's an art to each of those sides, and it depends very much on the spirit in which it's given, and the talent and the skill which is distilled into that work, and also the spirit in which it's received and acted on. Yeah.
I totally agree.
That was quite a long explanation, but I just because I think it's a really complex subject. This idea it goes to the heart of defining what astrology is.
I think also what you're touching on here, if we think of that subject you've addressed as a spectrum, and we say, a sun sign astrology is a load of rubbish, whereas, I've got a diploma in whatever, and I'm specializing whatever. What we're saying is that there are better forms of techniques, which may be true for certain purposes. But then at the other end of the spectrum, we could say, well, Vedic is not so good as tropical, or tropical is much better than Vedic, or blah, 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 blah. Well, the Mayans didn't know what they were talking about. Well, there's any one way. I mean, there are people forever you see them on Facebook, forever parading their thing, saying, well, the only way to do it, that calculation is wrong. This is the way to do it. Don't worry about the nodes, whatever. Now, I'm going slightly outside the point about sun sign astrology, but the point that Carol's touched on is this tendency to appraise and then place a value on. And really what it comes down to is the intention of the astrologer, but also the extent to which the receiver of the information, whether it's the reader or your personal client, to what extent do you meet them? Because it's not like you're going to a doctor and you get a diagnosis and this is what I advise you to do. It may sound like that, but the dynamic, I think, is different, because the client or the reader is bringing so much of themselves to what you're saying. And that sounds dangerous to people who want to shoehorn astrology into a science construct.
Mm. Yeah, but if you're doing sun sign astrology, you've got to take into account that it is for people. You're not doing like mundane astrology. It's not events. You are communicating with people. And anybody that writes a column or writes books or whatever, you've got to be able to speak and be understood, and
Oh yeah.
that's just like good communication skills. But there's definitely a difference for when a client comes for a consultation. They know what sign of the zodiac they are. Well, they don't. That's the thing. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I was born on a cusp." I wrote a whole blog post about this. There's no such thing as a cusp. That's the one thing that drives me mad. You're either one sign of the zodiac or you're the next. It's a numbers thing.
Or maybe there is.
What? A
But the
cusp?
point is,
Well, yeah.
I'm not arguing with you on
No,
that.
I get your point.
Yeah.
But I mean, each sign of the zodiac, it only goes up to 30 degrees. So you're only as far as that sign until you get to 30, and then you go back to zero again or whatever. And so I've spent quite a time, and somebody says, "Oh, I'm on the cusp of this sign." Well, let's have a look. Let's see what date you were born and what time you were born. And well, you're definitely this sign. And that's quite eye-opening for people, because they go, "Oh, I never thought I was this sign," but they might know they've got other planets in that different sign, and then that's why they probably feel a little more the other sign of the zodiac. But yeah, you can sort of. But I'm always banging on about there's no such thing as a cusp, because you're either in it or out of that sign. It's because it's all down to how everything orbits and stuff. I mean, that would be the only thing that would really wind me up about signs of the zodiac and how they're determined, is the fact that there isn't a cusp. And it's very British to say that I was born on the cusp. Oh no, there is no cusp. Because that's somebody that doesn't understand astrology if they say that. Because all they're doing is reading the newspaper ones. The newspaper ones didn't start till 1930. And it wasn't that long ago. I think it was the Daily Express was the first one.
Yeah,
Is that right?
called R.H. Naylor.
Yeah, that's the one.
I think
And then he made
this Margaret. I think he did the horoscope for her or something.
Yeah, he did. He did, but because
The
she'd been
baby.
born. But then he made he did her natal chart, or her sort of natal blurb. But he also said something about the war or whatever that was going to happen, and it was at that point that he sort of sun sign astrology really took off. But earlier people, now I can't remember his name, is a flipping Pisces, Cairo. He did astrology and palmistry and stuff, but he only did sun sign astrology and signs of the zodiac and the dates that you were born. But he still knew quite a lot. I think he could probably construct a chart, but that's not what he was famed for. But yeah, I think sun sign astrology is cute. And as somebody's put into the chat, this Alejo will have to read the comments in the chat.
Yes.
It is the gateway. It is the gateway to learning more astrology by being interested that I am this sign of the zodiac. It's that aha moment when you find out that you're not just a Gemini or a Pisces or a Taurus or whatever. You go, oh wow, I'm all these other things in there. I think but you need to have that starting point, and that starting point is your sign of the zodiac, surely.
Yeah. This idea of legitimacy, I think, that Carol brought.
Or the urgent desire for respectability. I also remember some time back, I don't know why people always criticizing me on Facebook. I can't imagine what it is about me. But somebody was being very patronizing about the fact that I was doing sun sign astrology. Because I've written not just for the lady, but I've done other things besides. And this person, I think, was just got a diploma or something in astrology. And she was being very rude about the whole thing. But what was beneath it, you could tell what was going on here. It's that sad desire for respectability. Legitimacy may be another variation on that theme, but respectability goes to the heart of self-respect and self-image as well. And more people are coming from an academic background these days, maybe it's scientific or the arts or whatever, fair enough. But then they have to face the fact that they're moving from what could be a respectable discipline to what for many people is an unrespectable one, or one that's not legitimate or recognized. And I understand that thing that you want to be respected. We all want to be respected. But frankly, I don't give a toss, because I know there are a sufficient number of people who are privately very interested in astrology, and you find them all the time. I've lost count of the number of people that, if I go to a party or something and they learn what I do, then say, well, could you, I mean, even the church I go to, people sidle up to me and say, well, what is this? What is the horoscope? And I said, oh, that's a very good question you've just asked. And of course, as Mary said, you start with the star sign. And they're absolutely riveted by that symbolic process. It's all about symbolism. Back to that idea, we're using the same source materials, but it's just coming out looking differently. And of course, the other thing that people say is, well, how can you carve people up into 12 bits? That's another one. And so I have great fun introducing the idea. It's not that straightforward, but as a starting point, let's, in the beginning, there were sheep and there were cattle or whatever. And that is actually not a bad way of starting to categorize if you want to start, with those kind of generics. And then some people, like the people that Wade Caves interviewed, something drew them into the subject. Like with me, I thought for 40 years astrology was rubbish. But a curiosity about symbols drew me in. And then as I learned it, I realized that it really does work. And it comes to that thing of what are you bringing to the chart? What are you bringing to the reading? When Mary writes her books about astrology, people will be reading your books, Mary, and thinking, oh, I'm recognizing. In other words, they're bringing themselves into it. Whether you recognize them or not is another matter, but they're bringing themselves into it. And I think there is some kind of energetic conversion going on here. This could get a bit too magical, because I'm very much in the divinatory section of astrology, because it makes more sense to me than trying to explain it as magnetic resonances and all the rest of it. Doesn't make any sense to me. But I certainly highly recommend the Cornelius book if you want to deepen your knowledge of one way of looking at astrology. It's a very subtle book.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. Yeah.
Jeffrey always used to talk about the idea of presentiment, which is very relevant to the divinatory. It is the divinatory mindset. So the divination really, the symbol only speaks if you're in that state of presentiment or understanding that the symbol speaks to you, because it needs to speak to you because you are in a particular state or psychological state, or a particular emotional state, or a particular situation. If it doesn't speak to you, it doesn't speak to you. And it doesn't mean to say that the system doesn't work, it just means to say that it doesn't speak to you in that moment. So when psyche is open to the idea of a piece of information, you're ready to understand something is trying to work itself into conscious awareness, the psyche is open in that sense, then it will accept and receive the symbol. And I think there's a possibility to be in a state of presentiment when reading a sun sign column, because if you have a question, it might not be a conscious question, but if it's a question, deep inside that's trying to come to the surface, reading a sun sign column can be just as revelatory and just as spiritual and psychologically resonant and deep as, any other kind of experience that might be similar. So I think that idea of the relationship and the quality of the receiving from the person who's reading the sun sign column or sitting and having a birth chart reading, it's the same sort of presence and participation, this objectification of the information. Tell me about myself, tell me about my chart, tell me about my son, tell me about my future. That doesn't yield results. What yields results is to be in the space, to be a participant as the receiver of the information. I think that's really the heart of astrology. It's about being in that space, having that dialogue with the astrologer. It's something magical happens. But if you just want to if you want your astrologer just to download to you, what's going to happen to me? Who am I? What's going to happen to me? That magic really it often doesn't happen. Yeah. So that question of presentiment, I think, is interesting.
The others have pointed out too that take a newspaper, for example, or a magazine. It's a commonplace to say we have hectic, crazy lives, and there's so much multimedia now, so many distraction. But the horoscope has the power for a moment to center you, to actually say, oh, what about me? It's not just about what's going on about the world or what's happening over there, blah, 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 blah. The horoscope invites you into yourself. Now, on a sun sign level, say in a tabloid, it may be a bit superficial, it may seem superficial, but the very act of looking into oneself recognizes the possibility that there's so much energetic engagement going on here that we cannot properly explain scientifically. And I think there's that value. I think also I'll beg this question: what happens if AI starts writing these sun sign columns, which I strongly suspect they are already.
They don't get them right.
Well, I don't know whether what's right or wrong, but you're right to say this, that when I did the Grok thing at the Astrological Association recently, and we had a debate about AI and astrology, I invited Grok through my phone to address us, and I'd already tested it, and it gave me the wrong ascendant. It said I was an Aries ascendant. I don't know where you got that from, Grok. I'm Aquarius. But anyway, never mind. But the point of the matter is, you could see that eventually AI will get it right. And already, if you go into Google and you ask, if you say, well, Venus is square Mars or whatever, the AI will actually give you its suggested interpretation for it. So there's a logical step going on here that we're going to get AI sun sign astrology. And that would be interesting for anybody to reflect on what would be the validity of that.
But you haven't got the personal touch to it. I hear what you're saying about AI, but you can tell when something's AI. It definitely has a robotic sort of theme to it. And I mean, I remember the Society of Authors, and they're just about to, or they've started already, that when you publish a book, they're going to have some sort of sticker or something on it, written by a human. I can't remember what they were calling it, but written by a human, not by AI. So that you could be able to identify before you buy the book that this wasn't written by AI, this was written by a human. But then you also, when you think about apps though, because everybody uses, or not everybody, large amounts of people use apps, and they use them every day, and they want to know, is today a good day for me? And I can't remember the name of the one that's really popular, but I know it's all in black and white. It hasn't got a lot of colour in it, but they'll look at that and they'll want to read something of the day. But isn't that that's no different. There's a thing called the Book of Days, which my sister's written, because she's a different type of author to me. But back in the day, you had your Bible or whatever, and you'd have the Book of Days, and there'd be a different prayer or whatever for each day of the week. It's no different to sun sign astrology. Somebody wants to read something that's going to resonate with them a bit. Am I going to have a good day today or a bad day? What should I be focusing on? And I totally agree what you say, that when you write it, it takes it back to the person. They're not thinking about the war here or the weather there or the climate change. They want to know about themselves. It does take them back to themselves, and I think that's lovely. You've just got a few sentences that, I mean, I used to read Patrick Walker's column because I found he was really good. It resonated for me at that point in time, which I think was in the 1980s when I read that. And it did then sort of resonate. And I thought it's got just a few words for the day of the week. And I thought it was great. I wouldn't want to do a daily column. God, can you imagine all the writing for that? It'd be horrible. It'd be too much work.
It's in fact industrialization. I mean, I know the Daily Mail, they work 3 or 4 months ahead, and it's really, I mean, no wonder Kana had an army of writers helping him out. I mean, they would churn it out, and then he would kind of be the style editor to make sure, because it would all start with a semi-abstruse philosophical little musing about something. And then I learned, just read the last sentence, because that's where the message was. I could live without all the guru stuff. There was a guy, what was his, I've forgotten his name already. He used to be on Vanity Fair, and he had mastered the art of blending wit with, he was in New York. He died about 3 or 4 years ago. I lived in New York, and I think he was called Mike something or Michael something. I've forgotten his damn name. But he had mastered the art of a fabulous wit, and he could be quite cryptic. And then he decided to go serious because Pluto was going into Capricorn at the time, and the editor, Graydon Carter, said, "Oh, very well." And they traded. I'll run you a big essay about what's going to happen. Pluto goes into Capricorn, and it was so depressing and horrible that there was almost like a revolt on the magazine about an astrologer daring to get serious. And in the end, they got rid of him. And I thought it was appalling because up to that point, he'd been a very popular sun sign astrologer. And I thought that was very sad. But unfortunately, the skeptics on the magazine used it as an excuse to get rid of him. Pressure was put on Graydon Carter to get rid of him. I'm very annoyed. I can't remember his name.
But it's happened a lot. I used to do a monthly radio show on Somerset Somerset, BBC Radio Somerset, and I was invited into the studio, and I'd do that month's stars, and I'd do them whatever the month was. So whatever month we were, that would be that sign of the zodiac first, and then after a time, and I did it for quite a while, something like 4 years. Eventually, the BBC got rid of every form of astrology.
Oh, yes.
And I'd
Yes.
been on Heaven and Earth as well, but I'd had this regular radio program, and I used to go on to BBC Radio Bristol a lot because I don't live far away. They were always calling me onto the show. And then all of a sudden, because they started to say that it was like Satanist and stuff, and they changed their sort of terms and conditions, and that's it. Boof, no more astrology on the BBC anymore. So that was a bit sort of harsh.
Don't talk to me about the BBC. I mean, it's Michael Luton that I was talking about, by the way.
Right.
Some of you might have heard of Michael. Amazing guy, actually. But I don't know whether people listen to BBC Radio 4 today. It's a morning news show. And they all seem to be out of the same mold. You know, they've all got a disdain for astrology. And I've had running feuds with some of the broadcasters, you know, because whenever they mention, if an astrology thing comes up, they're always like tongue in cheek about it and disrespectful. But of course, the real priests are the astronomers. When the astronomers come on, they're revered, you know, and when the astrologer, no astrologer's actually ever, to my knowledge, actually been on the show, but with they're talking about it.
I've been on Heaven and Earth. It was a TV program called Heaven and Earth. I went, they haven't had on radio.
Were you on that?
I was on it, yes. I was on an episode. They came to my house and filmed it, and it was all about religion. And they sort of had done the series about religion, and the one they were saying like astrology was equivalent to religion, and I got interviewed in my house. It was the weirdest of things. And they wanted to know all about astrology. But I actually did the presenter lady. I did her chart. I did it sort of quickly and whatever to find out what she was up to. And then I did a few people like the camera person as well. But they were so interested in it, and people are interested in it. But there's this blanket thing now that astrology, because they used to be able to, BBC used to have a lot of astrology. If you go back to the old bits of it, you'll find tons. You know, apart from actually TV presenters and stuff, but it's not like that now. America is fine; they don't have a problem with it, but the UK, it's really discriminatory to astrology.
Well, as I say, they seem to promote. I mean, they're coming. Although obviously everyone's different, but they seem to be coming from the same mold in terms of their intellectual understanding of how the world operates. So there's this over reverence for science, although science is a fabulous thing. It's, you know, it's a body of knowledge, all that. But they all seem to share the same prejudices. Yeah. And after a while, you've got an echo chamber. And sometimes I lose, I can't distinguish one presenter from another, because nobody's actually advancing and let's not pretend that BBC journalists are all objective. They're not. They're bringing their prejudices just like anyone else. Just I have prejudices, you know, or preset ideas of how the world works. And at the moment, we have a BBC, unfortunately, which is very much, how should we put it, policed. Not a great fan. Frank Clifford, we all know Frank, don't we? And he was telling me how he was doing a Sun Sign column for a certain monthly magazine. And at some point, the editor said, can't you put more sex in it? And he played along for a while, but then realized that they were only interested in the amatory side of things. And so he backed out of it. You know, he dumped it. So I think as astrologers, like with Rachel Johnson saying, well, can't I be satirical about it? I think we have to apply our own standards here as well. It's not just about accepting a gig and I'll take that check or whatever.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot in the chat, Alejo.
Yes, I was going to mention this. There is a question about timing. So in 2026, people are much more glued up about astrology than in 1964, when I was born. What do you think about that?
I think it's lovely. I think it's great. There's a whole generation of people that understand it that much more. And you can Google it and find it. And people, you know, if they've got, everybody can have their own YouTube channel now, yours truly. And you could sort of talk about whatever you like on there. And I've got a podcast as well, 400 and something episodes. And I get people contacting me that have listened and really like it and stuff. So I think astrology's, they're like the mainstream. It's not there, but it can be in lots of other different places. Yes, and I think people do know their charts, and the younger generation clients of mine, they're well into it. I definitely think it's changed a lot in my lifetime, and I do think the younger generation are much more accepting of it for sure. Yes.
Well, there have been essays in various respectable, that word, publications talking about the millennialists, what they call
millennials, yeah.
Millennials.
Who it's not so much that they accept astrology in the terms that we're talking, it's more that they're open to the idea as a reaction to science, because science, of course, can do fabulous things. We all know AI is a product of that, but also AI or science cannot answer the fundamental questions. You can only speculate.
Yeah.
And after a while, it's only human nature to kick against that which seems absolute or monolithic, or has got all the answers when they haven't. So the millennialists seem to be more open to the idea of astrology because in some ways they can't box it too well. They're accepting of it, but not in an unquestioning way. And that was
you won't get the answer to, like, why am I here from a scientist? You know, what is my life purpose? It's the biggest question that I get. Am I on the right path? You know, those are things that people really, really want to know when they're younger. Sometimes even people ask that when they're older as well. You know, am I on the right path? Am I suited to what I'm doing? What should, I don't use the word should, it's so bad for you, but what would I be happier doing? You know, these are all such important questions. And that's why astrology is sort of on a, maybe astrology's on a cusp between, you know, it's not therapy, it's not this, it's not that, it's just a thing in and of itself. And when people get into it, they absolutely love it. I don't know very many people that have got into astrology and then got out of it again afterwards. Have you ever come across anybody that's done that?
There's that guy, a very famous guy, I can't remember his name. I'm having a mind thing tonight. And he was an astrologer, then turned against astrology and is a constant bane. I know Roy Gillett used to fume.
Jeffrey Dean. Do you mean
Jeffrey Dean? Jeffrey Dean, that's the guy. And he's forever, I don't know where he's coming from, quite frankly, because a lot of his analysis, I mean, he writes these thunderously large books, but he's applying a kind of, he's trying to shoehorn astrology into something it is not. He's trying to treat it as science, and then it's a failed science. So he's trying to build it up in order to fail it. That's how it seems to me. And I think he's got this 1,000-page book out. Maybe Carol knows more about it than I do. And it's just, I don't know. It's just, I've tried to go through it, but I can't make head or tail of his approach.
I think he deliberately rejects the magic of it, because in order to accept that side of astrology, you have to let go of the objectification of it. That every time you look at a chart, it's going to tell you an objective piece of information. It's much more complex than that.
Very much so. Is it worth my reading Julia's observation, which I think she's put it very well, which I think captures some of the points that we've all made. She says astrology, and especially sun sign astrology, deals with the universal need to be seen. We all need this. The difficulty may be the individual projections from the collective and the astrologer. For example, we know everything rather than we are searchers with a particular illumination, such as, that is, astrology is our chosen lamp. I think that's a wonderful observation. And I think it applies at different levels of astrology, whether you're talking about the entertainment side, if I can put it that way, or somebody who's into some abstruse, very specialized technique. I mean, it's interesting, the other point you said about the search for meaning, or why am I here? I mean, I learned Draconic astrology, as you may know, and then the busiest time for me was during lockdown, when people suddenly had time to think. You know, they weren't on the train anymore, they weren't driving to their job anymore, they weren't working with control freaks anymore, they were at home, and they had a lot of time on their hands. And I was inundated with people, and it coincided with my Draconic book coming out. And forever, I mean, I must have had hundreds of clients over a year or two, all seeking that question. I mean, I don't come up with absolute answers, but I suggest things to people. It's just answering your point, Mary, that it is an eternal question that no scientist can answer. I'm not sure I can answer it, but I can suggest an answer from an analysis of the tropical and draconic.
And as sort of religion has lessened, which apparently isn't now, the sales of the Bible have suddenly shot up. But as religion has sort of gone down a bit, where are you going to go and ask those questions? Nobody ever wants to go to a counsellor unless they're going through a divorce or something horrible. But people like to be able to go and talk to someone, but there's something just sort of extra to it. There's this sort of, dare I say, mystical angle to it. There's something that you're not just talking about your job, and it does come under the banner of spirituality as well. I mean, just even the names of all the planets and stuff sort of sound quite nice, and they're beautiful. And I think people like that as well. Even if they don't understand how a chart's constructed and stuff, they can still comprehend, if you translate correctly for them, what's useful for them. Because what would be the point in astrology if it wasn't useful? And anyway, when people have these arguments about it, you think, well, it's been going since the Babylonians a couple of thousand years ago, and it's still going. It can't be that rubbish.
I go to a Church of England church, and sometimes people say, isn't there a contradiction between that and my work as an astrologer? And I said, well, what do you think the Magi were, for starters? I mean, if people actually read the Bible, it's amazing what you discover. I said that to the priest recently. You ought to read it sometimes. You might find it illuminating. The satire wasn't lost on him. But the thing is, for me, the faith is of less interest to me than the space to go into another mindset. That's the effect it has on my mind. I don't say it's like astrology, but astrology has a similar dynamic going on where you do shift to another place, which touches on what Carol said about Geoffrey Cornelius and other people besides. But it's that shifting into another space, which could be timeless, is spiritual. As I say, the faith element I question quite a lot, but I can live with it.
Well, it just depends where your Jupiter is, doesn't it?
Virgo.
Oh, well, there we go.
That explains everything. I like corsets. But it's interesting, the previous priest, who had quite an intellectual approach to religion, would say to me, well, you're a pagan. I said, well, you're making it sound pejorative. I actually quite embrace that word. I mean, what do you think? A lot of rituals in the Christian church have a pagan origin. Just decorating your house is a pagan activity, for heaven's sake. And I said, if you think about the symbolism we associate, say, with the planets and various other celestials, they are related to deities. That is absolutely the case. But the faith element, and this is where some people deeply disagree with me, but you've got to invest some element of faith in the symbolism. I mean, when you're reading a horoscope, you are to some extent trusting the symbolism of Venus or Mars or the sun or whatever. And I'm not suggesting astrology is a religion, but there is some similarity. You are actually investing your faith or your beliefs or your ideas in symbolism. I mean, I had an argument with a certain American astrologer who said, no, Victor, you're missing the point. The astrology works of its own volition. Like it would work anyway, even if you're not looking at the horoscope. And I said, I think you'll find it's not like that at all. It really is an interactive exercise. It starts here, and then you've got the client or your readers, and it's all starting there. And then there's some kind of magic happens or some kind of interaction takes place. And the same thing happens when you're looking at an altar in a church. I mean, I serve in my church. I love being part of the ritualistic symbolism. I feel like a player in that church. You could say, oh, you feel like an actor, do you? I've been accused of being an actor. But actually, it's a similar process. It really is, in my opinion. I mean, some people may disagree.
This is a valid point. This is an interesting point, because if we go back to the issue about Sun Sign Astrology, it really means actually there's a lot of worth in it. There's a lot of meaning in it.
Absolutely. In my opinion, I mean, I think there's a general agreement here tonight that we are, a starting point is symbolism. Some people say, oh, the starting point is this or that. But without the symbolism, you don't have astrology. And without the acceptance of that symbolism or the absorption of it, you don't have astrology. You've just got a load of glyphs and bits and bobs in something that looks like a cartwheel.
Yeah.
Because in fact, the whole thing is symbolic. I was thinking about the church. There's not one bit of the church that isn't symbolic of something. And I have to laugh when people say I'm a bit of a loony because I'm an astrologer.
Yeah. Very nice debate. Thank you so very much. Yes. And I don't know, we have a few more minutes. I don't know if somebody wants to add something else. Yes, Wendy. Wendy, yes.
Can you? I'm muted. I've never been a great fan of sun sign astrology, and although I do believe it's got its place, but really in response to what Victor was just saying, I don't agree that it starts in your head. I think that when I first started reading charts, I found that, and this is why I really not wowed about sun sign astrology, is that the chart gave me a whole picture. And I used to ask myself, am I reading the person or am I reading the chart? And for me, it was a process. I don't read charts much these days, but it was a process of building a picture, building a whole picture of that individual person, which you can't do with sun sign astrology because every person, whatever their sun sign, is different.
I wouldn't disagree with that, actually. It's just a question of the level of focus. It starts in the head because you've got to learn the astrology first. You've got to have that information in your head, and God knows what's going on in our brain as it's processed. But then something else clicks in a different gear. So I don't actually disagree with anything you said, Wendy. You do build up a picture as you look at, say, a natal chart when you're delineating it. And of course, when you're looking at a star sign, you can't build up that picture, but you can build up a story. And maybe anyone who's written the star sign column will understand that. That's the way my mind works. Maybe Mary, it's different, but I build a picture for the purposes of the column. Let's start with Aries.
Do you build that picture from what's happening in the heavens at that time?
Yes, the transits.
Transits, yeah.
Yes, because I can't see how you could do it without that.
Although that's how you do it. That's how you do it. You look at each. Let's say we start with Aries. You look to see, well, where is Venus sitting in the Aries chart? Where will Venus be sitting in the Gemini chart? After a while, it's very simple. It's just a question of coming up with 12 variations on the transits, which is why I say we're working with the same materials in the end. But your focus will decide the quality of what you write. Because some people go off beam. I mean, you can always read a column when it's gone off beam. They've decided to throw in an asteroid. I'm not against asteroids, but it's best to stick to the principal planets when you're doing sun sign astrology, because that's what you're understanding. And all the minutiae, the other celestials, let them have a rest. But I've seen asteroid charts as well, asteroid charts. I won't comment about that.
But I mean, the image you create when you're doing sun sign astrology is not individual. Like I think Wendy was saying, I have the natal chart and I see the individual image of the person in my mind, in my head, or in the space. But when you're doing the sun sign, you're creating still an image that is meaningful, but it's less individual. It's more collective. I don't know.
Yeah, I
No,
think
it's individual to the sign. It's not collective to every 12 signs of the zodiac. It's
Exactly.
individual to the sign. So you're a Taurus, I'd be talking about, whether or not Venus was or wasn't in your sign at the moment. I mean, the way that I wrote my column, I did them literal transits, whatever planet was in that sign. And if it wasn't a planet in that sign, I was told by a lady when I started writing my column to do it via the houses and the ascendant being the sign and what might be in there type of thing. Because there's quite a few different ways of doing sun sign columns. But, like at the moment, 2 planets are just about to change sign, and then Uranus is going to change sign. And you can't keep saying that all the time, otherwise you'd be repeating yourself. But you're still having to, because I've found you have to communicate with different signs in different ways, and different signs are more interested in some stuff than they might be in others. Yeah.
yeah,
So
that's a
you
very
can
good observation.
tailor it in a certain way, but you're not writing it to the individual. You're doing it as much as you can to the sun sign, but obviously you can't do it for the chart, because that's totally unique. Every flipping person's got a totally different chart.
You're
Boom.
looking for a theme. You're looking for a theme, and then trying to find a way of expressing it that it's not taken too literally, and yet can resonate with the reader. As Carol said, it's a bit of an art. It's not always easy if you're trying to condense it down to like a capsule 50 words. Of course, there's always the phone line to go to, but that we won't talk about phone lines now, which are going out of
Are they
fashion.
still £1 a minute?
Well, I mean, that's where most of the Daily Mail astrologers' income comes from, the phone lines, but it's going out of fashion.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway,
Well, thank you so very much for everyone who came and everyone who will watch the recording. Thank you very much for Victor and Mary for guiding us, and everyone else who participated. Actually, the chat was also very active, and some of you spoke up, which makes it nice, because the idea is to create community here. And stay tuned to In the Loop for the next one, which is going to happen in February. I don't remember now. I think it's Rod Chang and Kenan from Turkey. And do you remember the theme, Mary? I forget.
I haven't got it in front of me, no.
Yeah, I forgot. Okay,
Sorry.
if you are in the loop, you will get the email with information. And nice to see you all. Thank you very, very much.
Thank